Okay, back again. So, the question is, how can you know when the piece that you're making isn't just as good as you can make it, but as good as it can be? And, you know, I was really drawn to that question because it implies that there is like an objective standard where you can judge art and say, this one is better than this one, is better than this one. And you can use objective criteria for looking at things, right? But it doesn't really, it's very limited. It doesn't really tell you what's really good and what's really bad. There are pieces that are mechanically very well done, and they're awful, just terrible. And there are other pieces that seem very crude in their concept and execution, which are really remarkable. So I want to look at some work, and you'll be seeing what I'm seeing as I'm talking about it most of the time. You'll be seeing me occasionally. And talk about the qualities. All the work I'm going to look at this evening, I think, is as good as it could be, right? But they're not at all alike. They're very, very different in how they're great. And, you know, I really want to challenge the idea, though, that, and this is something which floats around in art, amongst, not just in art, that either it's a masterpiece or it's a piece of shit, right? Or you're a genius or you're nothing, this person, right? And this really is a very destructive way of looking at work. So, starting with Mayol, and this is one of the river goddesses. This one's at the Modern. There's another one, a little different, at the Norton Simon in Pasadena. And I saw that piece first when I was like 18, 19. I thought it was awesome. I love these pieces. And you know, the form of the body is exaggerated. It's made a little heavy. It's not like a Botero, right? Or a Gaston Maché, but it is exaggerated. And it's melodramatic. This is also, it's a very odd thing. It's cast in lead. It's not bronze, it's lead. You don't see a lot of that. But it's a great piece, wonderful piece by Mayol. So it has kind of a lot of Mayol in it. You know, he tends to do, let me go to another piece here. He tends to do female figures. This is Paloma, okay? I mean, I'm sorry, not Paloma. Pomona, this is Pomona here, this figure. And it's kind of neoclassical, but here again, you know, the body's rather heavy, and it's exaggerated, and she's holding fruit in her hands. Really, really, really nice. Now I want to contrast Mayol with Brancusi. And let me go here and pull this up a little here. That's not better. I want to look at this piece now. And this is, I think it's called The Spirit of the Earth by Brancusi. And it's a really great piece. You know, it's not, it's kind of a primitive image. It relates to medieval art, right? You know? It's also simplified in a different way. it's almost childlike in the same way that Paul Klee paintings are childlike, and it's like really, really very beautiful in the same way. But how can this be a great piece of art and this be a great piece of art? I mean, isn't this just kind of primitive and childish and poorly done as compared to this? But it is a great piece of art. And I'm going to look at another mail here. And so this is, it's quite an interesting figure. And here again, you have a real exaggeration of form to give an emotional statement, right? It's got emotional charge to it. And it's also neoclassic, but it's screwing with those ideas. You would never see a Greek piece that would look anything like this. It's indebted a little bit to Rodin in this idea of exaggeration, the form of exaggeration. Beautiful piece. But here again, what type of beauty is this, even compared to his own work like this? Can they both be great? Can they both be beautiful? Because they're so different, right? And it's the difference in art, the way that you capture some of the consciousness of the creator. And I suppose you could say it's how well the piece can capture that makes it work, or how well that piece can act as a conduit and to hold and to transmit that idea of consciousness, that particular take on things. This is another version of Bird in Space. You don't see this one as much as the more elongated one. This one actually looks more like a bird. It's highly abstracted, highly finished, right? And then it's resting on this sort of like truncated section of endless column. How can the same artist make this piece and then make this piece? How can they both be right? Either this is bad or this is bad, right? They couldn't, they're so different. It's the same artist, so different. So, you know, there is though an internal logic to them, both. You know, they both have an internal wholeness. They make sense in and of themselves, and so that's what makes them work. One last piece in this series. This is a young male figure by Brancusi. This is a wood version. It's pretty rough, you know, the wood is in pretty good shape, but it's carved in a very particular manner. You put together in a very particular manner. Beautifully done. And there are other versions of this that are in brass and bronze, that are highly polished. Is the rough wood piece, the original piece, is that the way it should be? Should it be highly polished? And by the way, Brancusi's high polished pieces are always full of scratches and pits. And you never notice. because the form is what's important. If the form was weak, every scratch and pit would bother you. But because the form is so strong, you never really see them. And that's like part of the idea of like, do you have the internal integrity in the piece? Does it work on the artist's terms? And then, you know, the whole question of how other people come to it. For some people, this, you know, young male torso is going to be terrible. They're never going to get it. They're never going to like it. They'll never make that connection with the artist. So for them, this is terrible, terrible piece, awful piece. It's a great piece. It's a great piece. But maybe for some of them, Pomona is a great piece. So maybe for some people, Mayol connects, and you've got that current going, and for other people, no. But to say which piece works and which piece doesn't, which piece is the best that it can be, and which piece is less than that, it really is a trick question. You know, does the piece work on its own terms? Does it really fulfill what you want it to be? And then the whole thing is like, does it connect with other people? Does it reach people the way you would like it to? You're not always going to be able to guarantee that's going to happen. And it shouldn't be the end all and the be all, although I think it's something you have to think about. But I'm going to go to another grouping now. And now I'm going to pull up Richard Serra and Daisy Youngblood. And I'm going to start with this piece by Daisy Youngblood. It's an orangutan, and it's a wall-mounted ceramic piece, and her pieces tend to be fired in a wood kiln without any glaze, and just very, very slightly finished by the smoke and the fluxing of the ash, right? So it's high fired, but not to the point where glaze is running on the piece from the ash, but just a little effect from the ash. These are gorgeous pieces. This is a gorgeous piece, and one of the things you get from her work, she's a MacArthur Fellow, by the way, the Genius Award, so she is a genius, right? She's a genius. Is the consciousness of the animal, the persona of the animal coming out. And that's a philosophical thing for Ms. Youngblood, is, you know, the idea, you know, that animals have consciousness, that animals have souls. Next image is called Bodhi. And I worked, I did some work for Ms. Youngblood when I was at Art Foundry back in the late 90s. And Bodhi is her daughter, was her daughter. I'm not sure I don't think she's still alive. And she had Down syndrome. Not too bad, but, you know, fairly severe. And this is a portrait of her. When I first saw this piece, I thought it was sort of a knockoff of a piece by Kiki Smith, which is not at all as good as this piece. Not at all. And I was really embarrassed and mortified when I realized what it actually was. And recognizing Bodhi and recognizing how great it is, the humanity of it is just remarkable, right? Just remarkable. She also does pieces that use rock and stick and ceramic to form these very abstract figures. But here again, what you get from that, like jackal's face, is a real feeling of persona in the when you see them in the flesh, they're much stronger. This is a portrait of a fellow, I think it's an art dealer actually, I can't remember his name at the moment, I'm terribly sorry. But here you can kind of see that it looks sort of pit fire, and then they've added hair, actual hair to the piece. But you kind of get a feeling of this person, even though the torso is just really a suggestion and the face is very simplified, but it's still really, I think you get a feeling of the person very much here. Okay, so this is great work. I think this is really, really great work, right? It's very personal. There's a lot of the hand feeling comes through in the hand into the work. You can really feel it, right? Okay. She did a series of pieces where it combined animal heads and human bodies. It's an elephant head. She did a wonderful piece, just an elephant head, that hung on the wall. Beautiful, beautiful work. And then, so here you have this piece with the human body. I would imagine that might actually be her. And this elephant's head, and you look at those eyes, you really get that feeling. Very interesting work, really fascinating, peculiar. You know, she got the MacArthur the same year that Tom Joyce did. And Tom Joyce is, I think, more famous, perhaps. But Daisy Youngblood, in my estimation, and here again, right, it's very subjective. What's great, who's not? How do you feel about this? And I really like Tom Joyce's work too. I think Daisy Youngblood is a much greater artist, much greater. So, how about Richard Serra? That's about as different from Daisy Youngblood as you could really get. It's a piece of rolled, heavy carbon steel, and it's embedded. It would actually be capable of standing by itself. It looks like it will fall over. It's embedded. This one is embedded in the cement, but the curve itself would keep it up. The weight itself would keep it up. But this is Tilted Arc. This is the piece that was destroyed. It was in Federal Plaza in Manhattan, and there was a great controversy about it, and in the early 80s it was destroyed. They wanted to relocate it, and Sarah said, no, it's a site-specific piece, you can't do that, so they destroyed it. So not much loved at that time, right? It's a little more popular today. But it's a great piece of minimalist art. Another shot, not too much graffiti on it at this point. It did get tagged a lot, which was the drag. You know, you shouldn't tag art. Most taggers don't tag art. Most taggers won't tag murals. Most of them won't. It's kind of because they're artists. They don't make this type of art, but they're artists. And so they won't mess with other people's art. But this got tagged a lot. You made it look pretty ugly. But it could have been fixed up if it had been given more time, but they destroyed it. But how can this be great and this be great? How can Daisy's work be great work? And that, which one is the best piece? Which one is better? And it's not even apples and oranges. It's like, you know, quantum physics and love songs. Which one is better? You know, art is like a form of communication, right? You're communicating. But it also has this quality, you know, as I said, like the art object is a capacitor of human consciousness. It holds it. And then when you see it, it releases it to you. If you buried it in the ground for 3,000 years and you dug it up, that capacitor is still charged, and you see it, and consciousness comes to you, right? It's a form of communication. It's an object of communication. So this is a different story, a different type of communication. It's a different idea. It's great as well. This is the installation, the huge room at the Guggenheim. It's Bilbao. It's Bilbao. I can't remember the name of the museum. It's at Bilbao, and it's an amazing room to walk through, right? And you would think now, okay, so this is somewhat confrontational because of the scale, it's somewhat threatening because it could fall over on you. Whether it can fall over or not, it feels like it could fall over on you. You go into these spaces, they're kind of uncomfortable spaces. What does it mean? Petro Hall, who I knew from back in New Jersey and who has been doing a little teaching for us, he was at a dinner at Rutgers when he was a grad student there, and Richard Serra came down and he was a guest at the dinner, and so Petro was sitting next to him for a while, and he thought, I'm not going to ask him about art. He knew his brother, Richard Serra's brother, and he had said, oh, he's a huge surfer, because Petro surfs. And so Petro starts talking to him about surfing, and Serra goes, oh yeah, I love to surf. It was so wonderful. It was just the most amazing experience. And look at these pieces, and when you get up into them, and you get into these curves, these overhangs and these weird huge angles, and they weigh thousands of tons, hundreds and thousands of tons, right? But they look like waves, don't they? I never had that impression, but when he said, oh yeah, he loved to surf, I'm looking at it and it's like, yeah, right, surfing. That must feel sort of like that, to be in those spaces. Now these pieces here are these is some of his latest work, and what these are just huge forged blanks. They're huge forged shapes, solid iron, and moving them must be just incredibly difficult. But this is one form of art, one form of consciousness, right? Connection. And this is another. But the one is not legitimate and the other illegitimate. And that whole idea of developing these boxes, right? And like, this is why I hate the notion of grading on a rubric. I think it's actually disgusting, and I think it's actually destructive to learning how to be a better artist. Is the idea is I'm going to rate you on a chart, I'm going to give you a 1, a 3, or 4, and add it all up, and this says if you're a good person or a bad person. No. I mean, mechanics, just raw mechanics, you can make that kind of judgment. But beyond that, and craft only has to be good enough to support that idea, that feeling, that conscious flow that you're trying to get. That's the level of craft you need to have. It may be very high, and it may be almost non-existent. You just have to have enough to do what you want to do. So it's not a question of mechanics. It's important to get enough mechanics to do what you want to do. So I believe in teaching mechanics. But you never want to get into the mistake of thinking that the degree of finish in and of itself is what makes things good and bad. It's just not true. It's totally wrong. One more set, and I will let you go. I have no idea how long I'm going on here. But, one more set. And this one, we're going to go someplace a little different. This is, I'm going to mispronounce everything. Royenji. This is the very famous Zen garden in Kyoto. And I had an opportunity to go there about a little over 2 years ago now. and it is remarkable. The first time I heard about it was when I went to the Huntington Hartford, and they literally, at the Huntington Hartford, they have a knockoff of this. It's not a copy, that would be too crazy to try to actually copy, but it's basically a knockoff of this Zen garden. And, you know, it's trying to get the same feel to it. And it really impressed me when I saw it. And I think if I saw it again, I would still be very taken with it. And one of the nice things about that Zen garden as opposed to this one is that that Zen garden is actually quiet, and there are very few people there. Whereas at Royal-Ji, you get there right when they open up, you go and you sit on the edge of this, you sit on the edge of this porch, and they would come out after meditation and sit and contemplate, meditate, looking at the garden. That's what it's for. And you sit, and you've got like maybe a dozen other people there, and it's very quiet and it's beautiful. And that lasts for a few minutes, and then the kids come, and they're just, it's a constant trooping of children. And I totally understand why the Japanese government does it, why it's promoted in the schools and everything like that. Everybody should see this national treasure. It kind of destroys it at the same time. Makes it very difficult to see, very difficult to appreciate. But beautiful Zen garden. And the idea, of course, is that it's a tool for meditation, so that you can become a bodhisattva, so you can become enlightened, which the Buddhists say you can actually do that this lifetime. You can take off the shackles of the material life. That's the idea, right? So, very nice, beautiful. Take one more look at this. Lovely, lovely garden. The raked gravel is supposed to represent water. Oh, and by the way, this is a reconstruction. Royal-Ji itself is a reconstruction of a very famous garden, but the temple burnt down. The temple itself burnt down, and they ended up pushing the refuse over the old Zen garden, and then years later they kind of cleared it out and rebuilt it. So this is actually not the first Zen garden. It's the second Zen garden, which was redesigned when it was rebuilt, but it's very, very beautiful. Okay. So that's one way to get to nirvana. But then there's this way. And what you're looking at in this shot are 500 life-size bodhisattvas, and in the front are what they call guardian deities. Okay? And this is also designed so that you may be able to attain enlightenment in this lifetime and throw off the shackles of the material world. And it's actually, when you actually go and look at it, it really does hit you. It's very hard not to be overwhelmed by the realization that you cannot look at 1,000 Buddhas. You can't see it. So that you're just struck by this idea that you can't get it by rational thought. You can't get there. You know, it's there, you can't get there. There's also the idea, many people think of Buddhism, and they think, yes, there was Gautama Buddha, and he was the Buddha. Yes, the idea was he was the first, or the first in that tradition, who attained enlightenment and threw off the shackles of the material world and became free. But in Buddhism, actually, they say there are many, many, many Buddhas. Many, 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 many people actually attain enlightenment, perfection. And they stay in this world only because they want to do good and help others to obtain that perfection as well. There are guardian deities, which are gods, because the Buddhists don't exactly think there's no gods. Remember, like, it comes out of Hinduism, thousands of gods. But they say, well, you need to get beyond the gods. You need to get beyond religion and the ideas of religion. So, but they still kept these guardian deities in some traditions. And this is sort of more tantric as opposed to Zen. And then I want to go up here and go back to Ryan G. And then just one last look. And this is the outside of this temple that holds the 1,000 Buddhas. And by the way, we found out about this place. We were told you absolutely have to go to it because we wanted to buy these little stainless steel and brass and bronze drinking vessels that we were in a sushi bar and it was raining real hard and this guy was going, oh, you absolutely, they make these little vessels at this little shop that's behind where they have 1,000 Buddhas. I thought the Buddhas were going to be this big, you know? And I get there and it's like, oh, they're life size, bigger. So, the front of this temple, what I see here, the front of the temple, they use that for an archery competition because it's so bloody long that you shoot from one end and hit targets at the other. So, it's an amazing place, as is Ranji. But how can they both be right? They can't. They can't both be right. Right? If you look at it as yes, no, 1, 0, true, false, my way or the highway, they can't both be right, but they are both right. I'm positive of it. If you've experienced both of them, one way is for one person and another way is for another person. But they're both right. So, that's how I feel about the question, how do you know when a piece is as good as it could possibly be? Well, I mean, I suppose if you would say that if you have an idea, and how far could you push that idea? Just your idea about what is good. How far could you push that idea? Or maybe that you would find something new, and that could make it great. But there's no scale, there's no box. It's a thing between you and the work, and then what other people see in it, because that's important too. So, I don't think that there is a best that it can be, but I think that it can have a kind of thusness. It can have an internal integrity which lifts it above other things and makes it more powerful and more effective. So, that's my take on it. You know, here again, you know, I don't have, I am not a licensed artist, because there aren't any licenses, thank God. But that is my take on it, and that's, you know, how I approach it. You know. So, and I think you do know when a piece really hits it. I don't know how, but you know when it's your work, when you really hit it, And you know when you look at somebody else's work and it really hits it. Go, that's the one. Okay, thank you.